The moment you have hotspots, 2, 3 countries with nuclear weapons, I think the possibility of their use is very high.
I'm Roland Oliphant, and this is Battle Lines.
I made wartime decisions. I know the choices are never clear or easy for the leadership.
I just find bombs and I find dead people, but it's a really scary thing for me.
Last month, the Secretary General of the United Nations warned that the world was on a nuclear knife edge. It is a scary moment, and it is not hard to see why. The fear of Russian nuclear strikes in Ukraine have become an everyday feature of the war there. China is rapidly expanding its nuclear arsenal, and the United States is modernizing its own in response. And Iran is closer to a bomb than ever before. The non-proliferation regime that has averted nuclear war for decades is under stress as never before. Raphael Grossi is possibly the individual most responsible for holding it together. The head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, it is his job to promote peaceful nuclear power and to prevent civilian programs from being used to build weapons. I asked him how dangerous this moment really is, how scared we should be, and what, if anything, we can do about it. The Bulletin of Atomic Scientists Doomsday Clock, which I'm sure you're familiar with, it's set at 90 seconds to midnight. That is the closest we've been, according to that parameter, the closest we've been to nuclear apocalypse since it was set up in 1947. Last week, Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, so I suppose in the way your boss said, humanity is on a knife edge. The risk of a nuclear weapon being used has reached heights not seen since the Cold War. States are engaged in a qualitative arms race. Rafael, how scared should we be? How scared are you? Well, how dangerous is this moment?
I don't know. These metrics, of course, I respect a lot, but there are many angles to analyze the situation, Roland, I would say. I think the ballpark, as Americans would say, answer to the question is look at the geopolitical tensions. And of course, when you take a look at that, you see a scenario that is far more complicated and perhaps confrontational than it has been. I wouldn't say that it has ever been. I would say that it has been for a number of years. War in Europe, Middle East war as well, non-proliferation latency here and there. We can discuss that later. Indo-Pacific, you didn't mention it in the beginning, but it's also part of my portfolio. North Korea, etc. And in all of these conflicts, open or not, the nuclear weapon has a role, implicit or more explicit, and it's logical, although one could say regrettable, then that talk about nuclear weapons, scenarios where nuclear weapons could be used, start to be considered and discussed more openly. And this is why I believe in many places, and rightly so, there is this discussion. Then I think we will have to take a deeper, I would say, plunge into each one of these to see what is what and what are the real possibilities of nuclear weapons being actually used here or there.
I mean, with the stakes so high, I mean, do you sometimes feel a little bit frightened doing your job? There's so much on your shoulders to kind of, if you get it wrong, something absolutely terrible might happen?
No, never frightened. But of course, a deep, profound sense of responsibility, yes. And the necessity, the need to, as you are saying, calculate every step we take, the initiatives we take, the approaches we take, the involvement we have in this different crises that you are mentioning.
Well, let's start looking at the specifics. I mean, the big thing that everyone wants to know from you, it's about Iran. I mean, basically, I've been speaking to kind of academics who follow this stuff, and they talk about how basically, at the end of the day, your agency are the world's eyes and ears on the Iranian nuclear program. That's what we know about. We know because of you.
Yes.
And as I understand, one of the big concerns is what you're not allowed to see, what you're not seeing. I'd like to get to the latest statement your agency has put out in a second, but very briefly, kind of, okay, concerning Iran, what can you see? What can't you see? And what are you afraid may be being concealed from you?
Yeah, well, indeed, we are the eyes and ears of the international community there. We inspect a lot. In fact, my Iranian counterparts like to say that they are the most inspected country in the world. I would add for a reason, but still there are gaps, and I will try to explain. We inspect a lot, and this is ongoing on the basis of the normal, typical inspections. We call them safeguards in the jargon, but the inspection activity that we have on declared nuclear sites. But we lost a lot of visibility on other related facilities, which we used to have under the now dormant or almost disappeared JCPOA. Your readership may remember what the JCPOA was. It was this agreement signed by the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, including the UK, plus Germany and Iran back in 2015. That, as you remember, was basically predicated, was Iran accepting a number of limitations, restraining itself from doing a number of things, with a quid pro quo principle of sanctions relief, Western investments, etc., etc., etc. That lasted until March 2018, when then President Trump decided to leave this agreement. Iran stayed on for a while, but then they decided, of course, also to not to observe anymore. And what I'm aiming at here is that as part of that agreement, the IAEA could have a lot more access to places which are very important as well, that are not dealing with nuclear material per se, but, for example, places where they were and are fabricating parts for centrifuges and things of this type. Uranium mining, a number of activities which are very important. And when with the JCPOA disappearing or becoming an empty shell, I lost all of that visibility. That compounded with the fact that Iran decided, as part of its newly found freedom, to do things like, for example, enriching uranium at 60%, which is very close to military level. Military level is the level, it's 90%, is very close. It's a technicality, actually. When you are at 60, basically, you are at 90, which means that is the level that you need to make nukes, to make nuclear weapons. And having the material to have nuclear weapons is hugely important. It doesn't mean Iran has bombs at this point, but it means that they have the material which is necessary to do that. And if you add this fact with this loss in terms of visibility for the agency, and if you put on top of this already complicated salad, the fact that we found traces of uranium, processed uranium, not natural uranium, processed uranium, in places where we should have never found them, which means that at some point in these places, which might be warehouses or a parking lot or even a farm now, at some point in the past, there was nuclear activity, there was nuclear equipment, there was nuclear material. So we started asking them, well, we should have known something here. What happened? Where is the material whose traces we have found here? Why am I finding these things in a place that is no longer, I don't see any nuclear material here, I don't see a lab here. What was here? So put all this together, Roland, put all this together, and the picture that you get is a picture that has lots of holes, gaps. And so this is the scenario that we have now, and the reason why I have been engaging with Iran intensively to try to put things back on track to the extent I can. You may remember that I was in Tehran just a few weeks ago discussing with the now late Foreign Minister Hossein Amir Abdollahian. I'm not going to say now that we had an agreement and the destiny, prevents us from reaping the benefits of that because he tragically passed. No, but we had certain understandings. We were working actually the day, on the date that they tragically crashed in the mountains there. I was sending a technical team, as we had agreed with him, to start a number of technical exchanges that we had agreed on. So now we are a little bit back to, I don't know if you can call it square one, but it's been a delay, to say the least. I've already spoken with the new foreign minister, or the acting foreign minister, because as you know, they are having elections now in a few days. The new foreign minister is a very knowledgeable man, someone I know for many years. Actually, the previous nuclear negotiator, which says a lot. The nuclear negotiator becomes the foreign secretary or the foreign minister, right? So we had a conversation, and now we need to re-engage and restart this process. The problem is what may happen in Iran proper, and also the reverberations of this in the region and in the world.
Yes. I mean, I was actually going to ask you about that because you were last in Iran it was in May, I think.
Yeah.
And I did want to ask you, I think you've already answered it, whether, the death of President Raisi and Foreign Minister Amir Abdollahian had been a setback on your nuclear diplomacy. And you seem to be saying, yes, it has.
It has, inevitably. The government is gone.
I mean, are you worried, to be really blunt, to be honest?
Yes.
Are you worried you're going to get the replacements, the next government may be even more uncooperative and may, throw out whatever
May be
progress
the
you've made
case.
already?
I deal with the world that I have, not the one that I would like to. So we will take whatever comes. But at the same time, and I hope that we will be able, whomever comes to the presidency and to the foreign ministry and perhaps even to the Atomic Energy Organization of Iran, because don't forget that post comes with a hat of vice president as well. So one of the vice presidents, is one of the vice presidents, the senior vice president who became acting president. And another vice president is the president of the Atomic Energy Organization of Iran, Mr. Islami, who is I would say my most frequent interlocutor. So, hardliners or hawks or whatever, I think we will need to engage. I think they know they must recognize that there is no complete confidence in what is happening in their country. They profess total transparency, but what I tell them is, well, okay, you may say that, but unfortunately there is a deficit of trust. So, the only way you can regain credibility, trust, and regain normalcy, this is a recurrent issue in my conversations with them. They always say we want to be treated as a normal country.
You also say that you found yourselves talking past each other.
Yes.
I mean, do you think you found a way around that? I mean, very quickly, I know we're getting into kind of very general kind of terms here, but very quickly, do you think there's a way around that, or do you think you're still talking past each other?
Well, I think we had made a very good attempt at stopping that beginning of May. Now I want to see what happens with the new team.
Mm-hmm. So you've got to start that again. So you were talking about how they've been enriching to 60%. So we've had some experts say that means they've probably got enough of that. Just tell me if I've got this right or wrong, and correct me. That means it would only take about a week to produce enough weapons-grade uranium for one bomb. They could have enough for 6 bombs in a month, and after 5 months, they could have up to 12 bombs. Is that fair?
No, we don't agree with that, but it's still concerning. I don't think they can do it so fast. Mm-hmm. But frankly speaking, I wouldn't say it's a detail, but they could do it in a matter perhaps of a month or a bit more. And,
okay.
But anyway, I don't want to, disavow, or I know these are calculations that are made by people who are not there. So, but the reality, or I would say that doesn't take away from the fact that they are very close. They have enough material for a few warheads already.
Okay, so they are relatively close.
Basically, yes. They
right.
are. But again, let's not, confuse people here. They do not have nuclear weapons at this point.
But this is what I want to get to. So
yeah.
I want to get onto Zaporizhzhia and Russia and other things as well.
No problem.
But this is important. Okay, yeah. So Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran, yes. 2002, he issued a fatwa. That fatwa says developing nuclear weapons is inadmissible.
Yeah.
Right? And the Iranians always trot this out whenever you challenge them. They always say, no, we would never do this. It's absolutely unviable. On the other hand, So Kamal Karazi, who's an advisor to the Supreme Leader, said on the 8th of May, and I'll give you the quote. I hope it's translated properly. We have no decision to build a nuclear bomb, but should Iran's existence be threatened, there will be no choice but to change our military doctrine. It goes on, in the case of an attack on our nuclear facilities by the Zionist regime, Israel, obviously, our deterrence will change. Now, you've already said that, that kind of rhetoric increases your concerns. I suppose the real question is, has that change in rhetoric been accompanied by changes on the ground in terms of Iranian engagement with you and with the agency, or with any indicators of intent to weaponize?
Things are not so linear in Iran. There are many forces at play. There are different groups at play. There are different sectors that have different views. I should say that, for example, this quote, and he was not the only one. There were other people, I don't want to make it too long, but there were other very senior people saying very similar things than the one you just quoted from Kamal Karazi. And I told late Foreign Minister Amir Abdullahian, and Acting Minister Bagheri Khani, and the President of the Atomic Energy Organization of Iran, this cannot be. This cannot be, because these are very senior people. These are not commentators. These are people with important responsibilities. And if this is so, then this means that you're not telling me the entire story. And the other very important thing is that Iran does not have a right to have nuclear weapons. This, I put it in these terms because Iranians like to remind me and remind the world of their right, their inalienable right to peaceful uses of nuclear energy, which is enshrined in the NPT. The NPT also enshrines the prohibition, absolute prohibition, from having nuclear weapons for them. It's not for the UK, yes, for my country, Argentina, or Belgium, or Japan, but they cannot. So all this is like a normalization of talking about nuclear weapons, and it's not the only country where this is happening, by the way. It's something that we may discuss as well, because I am concerned about the porosity of the non-proliferation regime when you start normalizing this talk. Because yes, the fatwa exists. I respect this fact, but to quote Groucho Marx, I have this fatwa, I can have another one some other day. All right? And this is not, and we trust everybody, and I trust this is true. I would never disrespect the voice of the supreme leader of Iran. But at the same time, it is true that this may change. So we need to be very prudent when we refer to nuclear weapons. And I think NPT countries should stick to that. I must say, in honor to the truth, that in my discussions with Foreign Minister Amir Abdullahian, he said, we remain in the NPT, we will respect our obligations. And I found that a reassuring comment, of course. But there are these voices that also remind us from this latency that exists.
We could talk about this, and actually I do want to talk about it all day, but I'm gonna move on slightly to the other very prominent thing. The Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, obviously captured by Russia in the early days of the invasion of Ukraine in 2022. I remember actually standing on the other side of the river the day it fell, being handed out.
You were there?
I was there, and in a town across the river where they were handing out iodine tablets in case something went wrong.
My God.
And I remember saying to them, we spoke to the mayor of the town. I said, look, don't you have an evacuation plan? Like, in case, this is post-Chernobyl world, you should have an evacuation case. Of course we have an evacuation plan. The evacuation plan, calls for moving thousands of people in a short space of time, and no one ever thought it would happen in wartime, so it's not going to work. So we're stuck, and all I can do is hand out these iodine pills and hope to God nothing goes wrong. So far it hasn't. You famously crossed the line. You somehow persuaded the Russians and the Ukrainians to accept your monitoring team, who is still there, and I think have just released their latest report today.
Yes.
Please, give just very quickly, what is the latest status of Zaporizhzhia? All of the reactors shut down.
Yeah.
The question really is, how much shelling is still going on? Do you have proper access to the facility to inspect it?
Yeah. The situation there continues to be very precarious, very fragile. This is a combat zone. You saw it that day. It hasn't changed basically too much. We have had cases of direct attacks on the plant. The last one, this month of April, and we have had 9 blackouts of the station, which had to be cooled through emergency diesel generators, which is the last line of defense that you can have in a nuclear power plant. Let's remind that this is the largest, biggest in Europe, 6 giga installed there. So we have been able, we went there in September 2022 after long months of negotiations. I managed to get there, and we settled at the plant. We have been issuing a number of, let's say, principles, guidelines, pillars to be respected as an objective line of behavior for everybody, I would say, for the management there, which is Russian, obviously, and also for Ukraine. But, sometimes colleagues of yours ask me, how are we more stable or less stable? Well, and for a scale to 0 to 10, where are we? I tell them it can be 0, it can be 10 in 10 minutes because of the situation. On 6th of April, everything was okay. On 7th of April, there was a salvo of drones attacking, 2 hitting the rooftop of one of the reactors, and so on. So we need to be very vigilant, very vigilant. We continue our talks with both sides, which I think is very important, a rarity these days, if not an exclusivity, which I don't enjoy really, because I think there should be much more talk. But we are in communication with both, trying to effectively deter and mitigate at least the possibilities of an attack. At the moment, like you say, the facility is in shutdown. It's not working. My recent round of conversations in Kaliningrad with the Russian teams addressed the issue of the restart of the plant, because there had been some indications that there might be
I wanted to come to that. Vladimir Putin said he wants to restart the plant, and you seem quite adamant that, you can't do that while there's a war on.
What they said was that they are not planning to decommission it, so that they are planning to, of course, to use it at some point. But we have been able to get to an understanding, in particular in my last round in Kaliningrad, where it is clear for the Russians and also for us that it would not be prudent, it would never be advisable to restart the station at a moment where there's still active combat in the region, where there can be direct attack, or where the external power supply cannot be guaranteed because of this, constant attacks on the high voltage lines, which is very easy actually. So that interrupts the flow of power, and you lose the cooling function, which is absolutely essential. So it is, it's something that we go day by day. We are like a prisoner. We are marking a day, another day without an accident. And I think we will continue doing so until we get to a really more stable phase, be it a ceasefire or peace negotiation, or whichever scenario you may have.
In terms of your monitoring team, I don't know, how many people do you have there?
Well, it varies. Can be 4, can be 5. It depends. It's enough. There's good experts. They go around the plant. We do a number of activities there around the clock.
I'm told that they've been continuously denied access to certain parts of the facility and not being able to speak to some people, like control room staff. I mean, do you have any concerns or specific concerns that might be addressed if that access was granted, or if you were allowed to speak to people?
We are there and we follow a specific plan, all right? So it's not that, the experts are there wandering around. We do have, it's a huge site, as you can imagine. It's a huge industrial site. And so we are, according to a plan, we are looking into safety functions and other operations at the plant. It so happens from time to time that the Russian managers deny us access at a place or another. On occasion, they say it's because there is an incoming attack or security hazard or a danger. And of course, this is war, so we have to accept that. And then we ask again. But I would say, by and large, we have been able to see the essential things we need to see. And we continue there. We are constantly there, which is a big advantage because, my experts mingle with all the staff. We talk, we work. They live there, basically.
I mean, are you satisfied with how the Russians have generally managed safety of the plant. One of the criticisms I hear is that, only Rosatom staff are allowed to work there. The Ukrainian staff who refused to work for Rosatom or take Russian citizenship aren't there, and that means you just don't have the people who really know that plant on site, and that's potentially dangerous. I mean, how?
Yes, it is. To explain this situation, let me remind you that this is occupied territory. Go back to France 1940, all right? Or something like that. People work. And of course, there, Russia has established its own dominance, which is, of course, not in line with international law or the UN Charter. That goes without saying. I want to be very clear with this. The IAEA does not recognize this, but it is a reality, all right? Which means that those who stay there, they are now in Russian-controlled territory, and Russia has established certain administrative decisions there. So, yes, it's a situation of tension, but people, as I was saying, this is why I was pointing to the past, people find their ways to continue their lives, all right? So the people at the plant, they are professionals. They work side by side. It's not an easy situation, as you can imagine. And also the presence of the IEA, let me add as a side note, is useful because we are there. We listen to people when there are certain situations. We try to help. But I must say one thing, and again, I want to be clear, having a very clear understanding about the principled position of the IEA in line with the UN Charter. We do not recognize this. At the same time, the Russian technicians there are very professional. They know what they're doing. Never forget, these are Soviet plants. Some of them even used to work there and have returned in a very ironic twist of destiny. But they know what they are doing. They're not, a group of reckless people. And basically, they don't want to have an accident either. You can imagine that a major radiological episode there would have an impact in the Russian Federation as well. So it is not easy because they may want to take one or the other technical decision. We might have a different view. The Ukrainians might have another. And this is this equilibrium we are trying to, maintain in what is a completely unprecedented situation, completely unprecedented in history.
It certainly is. And I just wanted to get back to that. The thing that you mentioned earlier about this, at the very beginning of this conversation, you talked about the normalization of rhetoric, of conversations, of talking about using nuclear weapons or having nuclear weapons. And how what certain Iranian officials have said raises that alarm. We've seen it coming from Russia, from the Russian Federation. We see Vladimir Putin himself basically kind of raising the prospect of perhaps using tactical weapons. There is very clear saber rattling from a number of states. I think you went to Damascus quite recently.
Yes.
Which says to me that you're worried about other proliferation in the Middle East as well.
Everything is connected. In the case of Syria, if you allow me to address that a little bit, you remember that Syria, again, in the entangle of proliferation stories, you remember that at some point, Syria was building a facility, declaring it to the IAEA, which was destroyed, allegedly, by another country in the region.
Another country, we'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I think that happened in 2007, all right? There was a long political discussion there. The IAEA at that time, I was not the DG there at that time, but came to the conclusion that was very possibly or highly likely a nuclear reactor that had to be declared. Anyway, but that happened. That is part of the past. It doesn't exist anymore. But there were a number of additional facilities that were related to that reactor, Dair al-Zur or Al-Kibar. That was the name. Syria, I should say, in all fairness, continues to maintain that it was not a nuclear reactor. The technical assessment is that it probably was. Anyway, it doesn't exist anymore. But what do exist are these facilities where some other activities related to uranium production, to the fuel fabrication for that for that facility still are still there. And because of that, there has been this lingering doubt about the possibility of yet another country, in this case Syria, reviving the flames of the past nuclear ambitions, if I can put it like that. So I decided that I needed to try to address that, especially because of the current circumstances in the Middle East, and not to allow any more erosion of the non-proliferation regime. And then, of course, this, as you can imagine, this takes a long time. So we started back channeling, and finally, I was able to go to Damascus. I had a long meeting with President Bashar al-Assad, and at this point, we are trying to set up a mechanism for us to try to go to these places so we can clarify and we can address this issue so that there are no doubts about what might be yet another hotspot in terms of non-proliferation. So that is Syria. Then there is Russia, but I don't know if you want to go back to that or not.
I wanted to get back to this point about proliferation, about nuclear weapons, because the podcast is battle lines, and that's really what everyone's quite worried about. We have all this talk about using nuclear weapons. We have Iran, which you've said yourself is, if they want to get a bomb, they can probably do it now. How worried are you about a general dash for the bomb? If one country gets a bomb, others are going to think we want one, and so on.
Very good point. Very good point, because it is clear that if we were to have a breakthrough in this case and another country possessing nuclear weapons, others would do.
And we know that Saudi Arabia has made clear that they would, if Iran was to...
Other countries as well have said openly in the region, not too far from there, that if Iran gets a nuclear weapon, then they would have to do the same. And there is also, if you look, wider and if you open up your map a little bit and you go even to Asia, there are other countries where a discussion is also taking place where people are saying, maybe because of what we said in the beginning of the conversation, Roland, because of these tensions and because of this world where these conflictual situations are getting, harder, some are saying, well, maybe, the nuclear option should not be ruled out. And this, I think, is a tremendous danger, and one that can put us in a terribly dangerous path as human civilization. Because the moment you have hotspots, 2-3 countries with nuclear weapons, I think the possibility of their use is very high. So with all its deficiencies, the nuclear non-proliferation regime has served us quite well, I should say. Yes, there are cases here and there, but look at what is happening in Iran precisely. It's not so easy to walk away. The one who did, North Korea, which is very regrettable, it's not in an easy situation. Yes, they have nuclear weapons now, but they are basically isolated. I don't think that could be the case in the Middle East for any country or a desirable prospect. So that is a big concern I personally have, and this is why I try to, fly the flag of non-proliferation very high and try to assert the presence of the IAEA as much as I can. But of course, I need the support of the P5. I need support of the great leaders to do that. Alone, I will not be able.
But thank you, Rafael. I just want to finish on a slightly provocative question on that point, actually. What you're describing is potentially the collapse of the non-proliferation regime that's existed since the Cold War, a return to the original arms race of lots of people grabbing by. It's a terrifying prospect.
Terrifying,
On the one hand, we could say that people like you, international diplomats who work for the United Nations, are more important than ever in this situation. On the other hand, we might say, well, when a JCPOA came along and you had that mandate, there was pretty much unanimity amongst the P5 on the Security Council. It's a completely different world now, right? There is a clear division between Russia and China on the one hand, the United States and the West on the other. People like you who work for the United Nations are simply, you have to work for a system that just isn't working now. Is there any point are you able to do anything in this situation, or is the reality that this is not going to be solved until there's a general rapprochement between the West, the East, Iran, the United States?
I think the system is not broken yet. The system is under enormous pressure. I'm talking about the non-proliferation regime and the nuclear world order as we know it. It's under enormous pressures. The challenges are very big. And this is why I think the work of the IAEA and our activism, if I can put it like this, is essential. We need to be visible. We need to move. And this includes the war in Ukraine. Nobody asked me to go there. I just did. All right. And had I asked if I could go, I would never been given a green light to do so. So I think there is a space. There is a space for some degree of multilateral constructive action when you push for it. I've been able, and I hope that I will continue doing so, to talk to Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelensky. And everybody agrees that is a good thing, irrespective of their positions. I was at the Security Council a few weeks ago after these attacks at Zaporizhzhia, and I described what had happened. And of course, the political vantage point of the British ambassador was at odds with the Russian ambassador, but they were both saying, IAEA, stay, work, do your thing. So I am perhaps here not so pessimistic, or I should say I am professionally pessimistic or optimistic at the same level, I would say. We have to be realistic, but we cannot be passive. And I don't think we have reached the point where we throw our hands up and say, well, God, we cannot afford to say that. So we continue. I will continue. We will continue in this dialogue, putting initiatives in Tehran, in Damascus, in Kyiv, in Moscow, wherever I can, actually.
Rafael, thank you so much. Yes or no question. Some people say you might be the next UN Director General. Is that a job you're interested in?
Oh, at the moment, I'm quite busy, as we have discussed. We'll see what the future brings. Of course, I am very committed to multilateralism, and we will see. We have to support Secretary General Guterres, and we can talk about this in some time.
Thank you so much.
That's all for Battle Lines this time. Please join us again next week for more of the Telegraph's best foreign reporting. Goodbye.
Battle Lines is an original podcast from The Telegraph. To stay on top of all of our news, analysis and dispatches from around the world, subscribe to The Telegraph or sign up to Dispatches, which brings stories from our award-winning correspondents straight to your inbox. We also have a live blog on our website where you can follow updates on Israel and Gaza as they come in throughout the day, including insight from contributors to this podcast. If you appreciated this podcast, please consider following Battle Lines on your preferred podcast app, and if you have a moment, leave a review, as it really helps others find the show. As disinformation is a particular problem during conflict, we are relying on your support more than ever. Battle Lines is part of wider Telegraph foreign coverage in our podcasts. If you're interested in finding out more about the war in Ukraine, you can listen to our sister podcast, Ukraine the Latest. Battle Lines is produced by David Degahi, and the executive producers are David Knowles and Louisa Wells.